don't know me, my name is Ritu Mulkar. I'm the organizer of the NLP meetup, and I also run a small natural language processing consultancy on the east side. Today we have Kieran Snyder presenting on unconscious bias that we introduce in text. I'm super excited about this talk, not only because I have a female founder who is doing amazing things in linguistics and it's an interesting problem, but it's a huge social problem that is being solved by Textio. So without any further ado, Dr. Kieran.
Thank you. Since we have a small group, if I do a quick show of hands thing so I kind of know who's here and what to do. So how many people here are in academia right now? Either student or professor? So those are half hands. What are the half hands? Are you in academia? Are you?
Yes, I'm a student.
You're a student. And how many of you work in the industry in some way or another? You work in industry.
Yeah.
Industry. Cool. And how many are engineers? Okay. Cool. That gives me a sense. And how many have studied some linguistics? I know I'm Good. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about unconscious bias in text, what we do at Textio, but actually a little bit more broadly. I'm going to look back at some research I did even before we got started on Textio a little under 2 years ago now, and kind of why we got started. So my background, I have a PhD in linguistics, did it about 13 years ago now. Feels like it was more recent, but it was 13 years ago. Mainly focusing on NLP. The place where I sort of came of age was at Penn, where it was impossible to do linguistics without computer science to a high degree, right? So kind of inculcated in this quantitative approach to language, sort of the way I was sort of brought up as a student. I kind of got me started on this. Then I worked leading product and engineering teams at Microsoft and then a little bit at Amazon before starting Textio. We really had this premise when Jensen, who's CTO, and I got started that NLP, the class of technologies we call machine intelligence, which subsumes a lot of things, is sort of now at the point where there's no reason not to know how your doc is going to be received before you finish it, right? A/B testing is a way to see which variation works after the fact. What if you could collect a whole really large set of tagged data and find the patterns that predict document success ahead of time? Then maybe you could give people some pretty good advice before they make a mistake in the documents they publish, whether that's about the bias in their document or some other effect that they're trying to achieve. And it started us on Textio. So let's first kind of define, in this talk we're going to focus very heavily on unconscious bias. It's one small part of what we do at Textio and in my background, but it's kind of the focus here. So let me start by defining what we mean by unconscious bias. And the example I love to use here is about age. These are example snippets of text from job posts, which is kind of what I've been spending a lot of time on the last couple of years. So on the one hand, think about something with age is a great example because a lot of people who are very concerned about race or ethnicity or gender bias are totally comfortable exhibiting age bias when they hire. So you'll frequently see job posts that say things like, this is perfect for new grads, or are you a student? So very clearly the person in this case has conscious bias. What they're trying to do is hire a young person for whatever reason of their own. Okay, so I want to be very clear that there's conscious bias. You go a little further down the spectrum and talk about semi-conscious bias, which are not explicit. It's not saying this is perfect for new grads, but when you say things like you must have a minimum 3.5 GPA, you're communicating that someone's GPA is still a very relevant part of their hiring criteria, right? No one cares, I promise, if they're giving me a job now, no one cares what my GPA was because I graduated from college 20 years ago. I've done a lot of things since then. When you say minimum 3.5 GPA, it means probably graduated in the last 3 to 5 years. It's still a really relevant part of your professional qualifications. So things like, we really want people who love the startup lifestyle. I run a startup and I know what this is code for, right? This is code for, we want you to work. And so this is, it's not overt. The person who writes this isn't saying, I only want a young person, but at some level they have an idea probably of the person they want to hire person is probably fairly young, right? All the way at the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call unconscious bias, which is really just when you're communicating by virtue of the language that you're using, that you probably do have a young person in mind, but if you were pushed on it, you might not acknowledge that, right? These semi-conscious bias people, if they were pushed on it, they generally do acknowledge it, like, oh, yeah, you're right, I do want someone who's within 5 years of their college graduation. That is what I'm looking for here. But unconscious bias, when people say things like, by the way, real snippets from job posts, like we want people with mad skills, we want people who bring real hustle, it communicates that we want a young person because we're speaking in a way that resonates with people that often thinks with young people. So all of these range of consciousness, they all have pretty much the same impact, which is they select for a very particular demographic group. And I always choose age to illustrate this point because the examples are clear and stark and everyone can kind of get them. This talk is not going to talk about conscious bias. It's not even going to talk about semi-conscious bias. It's going to talk about unconscious bias, which you have to assume are people who don't mean to carry the bias that they exhibit, right? We're not going to probably help people with conscious bias like other terms. So, probably don't need to convince this crowd of this, but written text is amazing for bias research for a few reasons. The first is simply that it's written down. So it's when you think about building a corpus of speech versus something that is written text is far easier to work with most of the time. It's encoded. It's easy to search. It's easy to find patterns. Compared to when I was in graduate school 15 years ago, this work is so much more democratized because the whole internet is full of text. You have, without necessarily being an academic with access to phenomenal corpus building tools, you can actually choose a topic to study and there's a lot of text out there to help you. And I know at least a couple people in this room are not professional linguists who have done really interesting studies on their own using this fact. And then the third thing, which is really important, which we'll talk about, is that text provides a record of how language changes over time. So the patterns that may work today to hire a great person may not have been the same as the ones that worked a year ago, and they may not be the same as what works a year from now in terms of actual candidate response. So written text gives you all of this. You can take snapshots in time. You and I can agree on the data set in many cases because we can share it and we can talk about it, which allows you to really replicate great results. So, again, this is probably preaching to the choir in this room, but it's not always. So, with that said, I want to talk about a few background pieces, and I'll talk about findings here more than tech, although I'm happy to talk about the tech in all of these cases as well. When I first got started on this journey, my background was not particularly in genders. I was a computational linguist, but I had worked in technology for quite a while. I'll tell a story of kind of a culture shock event I had in my first week at Microsoft. It was my first actual job where I wasn't a student. And I had a friend who was a math professor who was coming to Microsoft Research to do a talk. And I thought it'd be cool to go see his talk. So a coworker who was a math person and I kind of went on to the talk together. We got there a few minutes early, and I walked into the room. There were two guys already sitting there a little early, and they looked at me and they said, very helpfully, "Are you looking for the design talk? Because I think that's across the hall." And I was like, really? And I had come from linguistics, and linguistics is plenty of men, plenty of women. It tends to be a field that attracts a broad mix of people because one way into it for many people is coming from a language background they develop curiosity about. So you tend to get a demographic mix compared to many fields in higher education. So for me, this was actually kind of shocking. And then as I spent time in the industry over the next decade, it became less shocking. Experiences. And my guys, yeah.
How old were the men?
30s. In their 30s.
What year was this?
2004. So a while ago.
It hasn't changed.
Oh.
Well, I can tell you it hasn't changed changed because I've done some of this research more recently. But examples like that started me on this path while I was at Microsoft. So I'm mostly working on NL and search technologies, right? Nothing to do with gender. But there was a day I had lunch with a friend of mine who was an engineering VP at a mid-sized company in Seattle, who was talking about 2 employees that he wanted to promote. And he tells the story, and he's like, the guy, John, he's going to be no problem. He gets a little impatient sometimes, but a lot of talented people do, and my peers love him, and it's going to be easy. Jessica, though, I'm going to have a much harder sell because she really rubs a lot of people the wrong way. She's very abrasive. Actually, she's technically much more talented, but I'm going to have a hard time. And as someone who has been in the industry a long time, and certainly in all of my performance reviews, I've heard very talented, great job, maybe kind of tone down the abrasiveness a little bit. I thought, oh, interesting, maybe it's not just me. So this was before I had started Textio, when I could still do things like put out calls for people to send me their performance reviews on social media, and they did, which is great. That doesn't happen anymore. But I basically decided I wanted to look at men and women in technology to see if I could find evidence of sort of systematic differences in how men and women were described. I did not say that I was looking for contributions from men and from women. I did not say I was looking for bias. I just said, hey, I'm a linguist, I've published a bunch of stuff. At that point, Slate had picked up some work I'd done on interruptions in the workplace. And so like anyone who wants to send me your performance reviews, I'm going to do the study, I'll keep it all anonymous. And astoundingly, hundreds of people did. And I banked on the fact that they would all be high performers sending me their reviews, with the premise that only really strong performers are going to be willing to share their performance review with a stranger over the internet. And luckily that was true. I wanted that to be the case because what I wanted to do was compare the language that was used to describe high-performing men and high-performing women. So I wanted a population that their companies tended to think was strong, they were getting promoted, they were getting raises, and surprise, there were a lot of differences. Sort of the punchline here. So these are people often who, even in the same company, same sort of level, there were 28 companies with reviews represented. There was no bias factor of the particular company, size of company. The only thing they had in common was they were all in technology and US based. So very rudimentary pattern finding here, right? I took a corpus, I had the gender of the manager, which by the way did not make a difference to these findings, and I had the gender of the employee. And I got to work beginning to look for patterns in the data. I looked for phrases that recurred. I did some basic sentiment analysis on corpora, and what I found was really striking. So I found, first of all, that the high-performing men received less critical feedback at all, right? Which you might actually argue was a disservice to men in many ways, but that the men would tend to receive who were high performers like, great job, Daniel, keep going, just keep up the good work, wow, you delivered a bunch of great stuff this year, here's I'm going to enumerate it all for you. Women received, across the board, more critical feedback. So you can kind of see the bottom bar chart there. Gives you some idea. So these are reviews that had something critical in the tone of the review. So actually, look at the numbers. 94 of the women's reviews that I was comfortable to code as women's had some critical content, and only 13 of the men's. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to measure whether their superior that was grading them was male or female?
Yes, no difference, which was the most striking finding of the study. It actually caused me as a longtime manager at that point to go back and look at performance reviews that I had written about employees. However, where critical feedback did exist in the men's reviews, it was far more likely to be constructive, right? So feedback of the type, hey, you've done a great job. I really like your Python skills to keep growing next year, right? Something that's sort of like, you are awesome, and here's the next step for your development, and I'm there all the way with you. Whereas women's reviews were much more likely to say things like, hey, if you did a good job on the presentation, but next time you really have to slow down and make room for other people. Or comment.
Hold yourself back.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't even always hold back. One of the common elements here was that positive or negative, the women's reviews were far more likely to contain personality feedback, right? So women were called collaborative as a compliment. Men were told that they had raised click-through rate by 14%, right? So it was very different. One was much more personality-oriented. The other was much more concrete in terms of business or technical contributions and feedback. So this was really interesting to me, and it surpassed what I expected to find. Again, this was sort of pre-Textio. It's the study, it's in Fortune. It was very much involved in the inception of the company. The piece went viral within a month of its release, and I had hundreds of HR leaders around the country contacting me, asking everything from what was your methodology, because we'd like to replicate it, all the way through to, because we hire you. And the answer at that time was, no, you can hire me, I'm actually building this software company. We were measuring Kickstarter success, and the factors that go into predicting success of a Kickstarter project have nothing to do with bias.
Great article, by the way.
Oh, thank you.